introducing one of the most powerful women in finance in India and a dear friend of mine, Neha Grover. So, why don't you tell me as to what got your interest into finance?
When I was in my 10th standard, spoke to my parents. They said, "So you can study whatever you want to, but you have to stay in Aurangabad." I said, okay, then no engineering, no doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. Third choice at that time was CA. I had a fabulous journey at Benning. I was there for 12 years. I did so many different roles.
And what qualities of fund manager do you look at?
So IFC is a developmental institution. We're a multilateral organization, and for us, impact is very important, super critical. We are here to create markets. We're here to develop ecosystems, develop the markets, and that's what our role is. I think there are alpha males and females, probably because of the percentage of more male seniors, or superiors, or bosses.
Yeah.
You probably see that more, and therefore it is more commonly known as alpha males rather than alpha females. But there are alpha females as well.
Thanks, Neha, for doing this show with us. Wiping Out the Norm is all about covering stories of women who have really struggled through and yet come up so gracefully in their own career paths. And you're one such woman in private equity, where, anyways, we see less representation, unfortunately, but you have come up and you are still on your way to, making it bigger every single day. So, why don't you tell me as to what got your interest into finance? Initially, a lot of people think or see only the top position where you at now, but I'd like to know, how did it all begin for you in the first place? What got you started?
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a honor. It's a privilege. I mean, what you've accomplished is no less. So it's amazing. So I think a lot of it, what happened to me was, I must say, by happenstance. I'm from a very small town, Aurangabad, and my parents are a conservative middle class family. Two elder brothers, when they went off to do this, to do their engineering college, when I was sort of in my 12th standard, 10th standard, spoke to my parents, and they said, you know what, you can't go. You can go wherever you want to. You can study whatever you want to, but you have to stay in Aurangabad. I said, why? No. You know, the traditional mindset of sending a girl out for studies was completely out of the picture. So I said, okay, then no engineering, no doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. So the third choice at that time was CA. So I said, okay, I'll do my CA because you're not sending me out, so I can stay here and do my CA. That's how I did my CA, and that was my first sort of
entry into the
finance world.
How did you end up getting a rank also in that? What was it? The first, second, third?
I'd like to say, well, I didn't work hard. It was all okay. But no, I think I did work hard. The middle class values were instilled very, very, very strongly in me since the beginning. I've always been good at academics. Parents were very clear that we need to make our own path. We need to sort of make our own journey, get good marks, get into good colleges, and get a job on our own merit, because we don't have either connections or a legacy to sort of rely on for a future. So always used to work hard, and I think academically, thankfully, I was okay. I did well. So I have to. I was lucky as well. So that was on so CA. Once I did my CA, then I think my elder brother did his MBA. So I followed his sort of footsteps. I said, okay, let me do an MBA myself. I realized one thing after 3 years of auditing. I don't want to be in auditing all my life. This is not something that I can do. So that was very clear that, okay, this is something that I can't do. I need to do something else. MBA sounded pretty glamorous. I would get to go 2 years and stay in a hostel. Again, a big thing for me. As a youngster, I said, okay, let's go. That was something my parents were okay with, because I would have finished my graduation. I would be older, and therefore they said, okay, after graduation, you can go wherever you want to for your job, for your studies. So I went into IIM Lucknow, got admitted to IIM Lucknow, did my MBA there. Happenstance was day zero placement. A private equity firm came. I had no idea. I called up my brother, asked him, okay, do you know what is private equity? I've read about it, but I don't understand. Do you think it's a good career choice? He was in London at that time, a trader. He said, yes, it's a great career choice. If you're getting into private equity, you should go for it.
Which company was it?
This was Baring Private Equity.
Okay.
That was my first job from campus. Went in for my interview. I think interviews went well, got selected, and got a job offer.
So they didn't
Yeah.
ask for your prior experience in any of this sort?
Yeah, no, I think for them it was, and that's my understanding is, for them they felt if a person has worked somewhere else
Huh.
and they come into private equity, it's more difficult for the person to unlearn what they've learned before,
Huh.
and therefore it's easier to train a fresher.
Right.
Train in the way of thinking and the attitude and the
Hmm.
behavior and everything else, rather than getting somebody who's already worked for 10 years, has some mindset
Huh.
which you can't change.
Correct.
So therefore, and maybe that was an experiment. I don't think they'd hired too many freshers at that point in time.
I think the
They did hire a
experiment.
few more freshers after me, so I don't think I was a total failure.
Yeah.
Hopefully
No, but
not.
your experiment must have turned out to be good enough. You spent more than a decade at Bering.
I did. I spent about 12 years there. It
Yeah.
was a fabulous journey. So I think that my entry into private equity was happenstance. I was not hung up on doing only one thing.
Hmm.
So the good part is the organization gave me an opportunity to do multiple roles, and I was also pretty happy doing multiple roles.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of youngsters, when I talk to them, they say, "Oh, we want to do investing."
Hmm.
Because investing is not the be all and end all. In a private equity firm, there are 5 other functions that are very critical, right? Like first you have to raise your money, then you
Yeah.
have to look for those deals, so deal sourcing,
Hmm.
then investing, then working with those companies to actually create value, and
Yeah.
then exiting.
Hmm.
So it's a full life cycle
Right.
for both the fund as well as the company,
Hmm.
and you need to know all of it.
Hmm.
If at all you want to sort of do well, you can't just do one thing. You
Yeah.
can specialize, that's great.
Hmm.
Some people love to specialize.
Hmm.
I was always a generalist at heart.
Okay.
So for me, every 2-3 years, I used to get a new opportunity to reinvent myself, do
Huh.
something additional, take on additional responsibility, which I loved.
Okay.
And that's how I think I look back and I realize, oh wow, it's 12 years already.
Yeah. So you remember the first deal you sourced at Bering, and how did you turn it around? Because Ps usually do that as a part.
So my first role over there was actually my CEO called me in and said, listen, um, why don't you work on? We've just grown from a small organization to a large organization. You're a CA
Huh.
and an MBA, so you know something about accounting, policies, and MIS, etc. Why don't you help us build our systems and processes?
Hmm.
So my first sort of project, if I may call it, was actually to build an internal MIS system, put in systems, put in processes to
Hmm.
ensure that as we are growing larger,
Yeah.
like a private equity firm wants the underlying portfolio companies to have systems and processes, we wanted to do that internally first.
Okay.
So building a portfolio MIS, building an investor reporting sort of report, making sure that all of these systems are in place.
Hmm.
That is what I think I focused on for the first couple of years.
Okay.
Hired a couple of people under me. When it got automated, when I think pretty much everything was set, then I moved on to other things. And I think I
Yeah.
focused a lot on the education sector, a lot on the textile sector. We did something in textiles, chemicals, agri inputs. Yeah.
But tell me, a lot of people speak about the successful deals they have done, but not so many people speak of the failures that they've encountered and how did they tussle over those. So, what were the most challenging times for you at Bering?
I think and for me, I think the most, I've been fortunate enough to not have any big insurmountable challenge in life. Right? There have been these small uh, pitfalls, small sort of stumbling blocks that I've always had, but I've always maneuvered my way. I've been fortunate that I can't say that I had this big mountain fall on my head and I was crushed under it. Um, the one sort of incident which I remember still very clearly in my mind is, and as a young sort of person in the firm with less than a couple of years experience, I was deputed to become a CFO in one of the portfolio companies, where the CFO was leaving and they didn't have a new candidate, so they said we need somebody who can come in and handle the ship for a couple of months, right, till we get a new person, take the handover from the old CFO, and then hand it over to the new person, whoever comes in. And I went to this company. I stayed in a new city for about for 2 months or so. I was young, didn't have family, didn't matter, so I went and I settled in over there for a couple of months.
Yeah.
I think that was one of my most challenging assignments because it was a new city, a new company. I knew it was a temporary role. I had never done this before, right? I mean, being a CFO, I didn't know
Yeah.
what's being a CFO, what do you have to do. it was budgeting time for them. So
Hmm.
budgeting, I realized later on, is one, getting all the information, but also extracting all the information from the right people.
Right.
So first, understanding who those right people are, building a rapport with them is very critical. Getting all that information and then putting it in a form which is useful for management,
Hmm.
and then giving it to handing it over to your management.
Yeah.
That was one of the most difficult sort of situations I faced in life, because it was hard. I was getting the handover from the outgoing CFO, but getting information, making that rapport, there was a language barrier. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the CEO very well.
Hmm.
I was getting some guidance from my sort of private equity firm partners here.
Yeah.
Uh, but for the CEO as well, I was supposed to be a resource for them, for the company who was working for them.
Hmm.
For me, my bosses were still sitting way back
Yeah.
in Gurgaon, in the private equity firm. So there was always a tussle. Who am I reporting to? What should I do? So that, I think, was one of the most challenging sort of situations which I faced, where I remember speaking to the CEO. CEO said, "Listen, you're my employee, work for me.
Yeah.
You're not here deputed by them. In your mind, if you think you are a CFO from the private equity firm, no, that's not the case. You're working for me. So you're reporting to me.
Yeah.
Your first responsibility is towards me, not towards all your bosses. When
Yeah.
you go back, that's all right. But right now, you're here."
Huh.
So I think all that was something new for me. As a youngster, I didn't know how to navigate it. Today, maybe I would have handled the situation differently.
How do you do it differently today?
I think I would first of all have this chat, right? Anticipate some of this initially. I never realized this could be a problem, because for me, we were majority shareholders in the company, and therefore, well, if I'm working for the PE firm, or I'm talking to them, or I'm talking to the CEO, why should it matter?
Yeah.
Today, I understand people dynamics a little bit better, right? Because the CEO has a certain responsibility versus as for towards the private equity firm, and therefore there are certain things that the CEO would want a certain hierarchy, a certain protocol to be followed. And I was in a very different firm. I used to work in a private equity firm. It was a very flat structure. We're not used to hierarchies so much.
Correct.
But in a typical operational company where you're a CFO or you're acting as a CFO, you have a very different role to play.
Yeah.
So today, I think, armed with that knowledge, I would probably do a better job of it.
Yeah.
I think work-wise it was all right. It was just the human dynamics of it which was very challenging for me.
And this went on for how long, your role as a CFO?
This was a couple of months, and then I came back, and then I managed it online for some time.
Yeah.
And then then I think the new CEO got hired, and CFO got hired, and I handed over everything to the CFO, and I moved on.
Yeah. You remember any interesting story of convincing an LP to put money in your fund? Or a difficult one where you cracked the code by really following up?
Well, you have all sorts of experiences with LPs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are LPs you will come, you will sit down, you will introduce yourself, and they will say, "You know what, thanks for coming, but I don't think we're going to look at this fund, but we're happy to hear your story." And you're like, "Okay, well, I didn't have to travel all the way to here that you're not going to invest in the fund."
My God.
So you have those kind of experiences. You have some experiences where people are very warm, very sort of nice, and they listen to your story. They'll ask a lot of questions. But I think that is where the skill is, to understand, okay, were they asking questions to understand this better, or were they genuinely interested? That, I think, was a skill that I learned over a period of time, over about 3 to 5 years. And now as an LP, because I moved to the other side of the table, where instead of now going fundraising, there are people who come, and we are now sort of allocating capital. So as a capital allocator, I understand, and I think one of the main takeaways for me for being a GP and now moving on to the LP side was, whatever it is, I'm going to be frank and I'm going to be transparent. I'm not going to be keeping people sort of hanging without knowing what the outcome is likely to be. A lot of time we also don't know the outcome. And that's why we tell people, listen, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. It might take us some time to come there. This is what the timeline looks like. So we'll chat when we come to that decision point.
Yeah. But you've seen LPs who make you just stick to your request and not come back with an answer?
Yeah, a lot of time. There are all kinds of people makes the world, right?
Yeah.
So there will be LPs who will never give a straight answer. There are LPs who will know they're never investing in the fund, but they will keep asking for information but never do anything about it. There are LPs who will keep postponing the decision as well.
Mm.
There are LPs who will also be very straight, who will say no to your face as
Yeah.
well, which is probably the best kind of LP.
Correct. You're one of them.
I am hoping to be and trying to be one of them.
Yeah. Okay. And you, because this is also about storytelling, people
Right.
love listening to stories. So, do you remember any exciting deal that you worked on which really took longer? That is also what makes it exciting, because you're working on it for a longer term, and when
Yeah.
it's finally done, like,
Yeah.
wow, a
Yeah.
good deal there.
So I think more recently, we did a co-investment with one of our fund managers. It took us almost a year to close that co-investment.
Okay.
Co-investments are typically investments that you want to do in 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks latest. And this one, we started work, and it took us almost maybe 11 months to close the deal from
Okay.
start to finish. I think commercially we were all on the same page. We wanted to do the deal, but there were so many small stumbling blocks. Some of those were the deal construct, the way it was evolving, some of the sort of peculiar asks that we as an organization have.
Mm.
Some were to do with the deal, the way the commercial the commercial sort of deal was moving.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was every few months you used to think, okay, the deal is dead, and then
Okay.
a couple of weeks later it used to come alive again.
Huh.
So it was super interesting. I can't go into the details of the deal,
Yeah.
of course, but
But what do you think makes a deal dead for any investor at any point in time?
well, there's a non-negotiable ask,
Hmm.
right, from either side, either
Okay.
from the capital allocator or from the seller or the buyer.
Hmm.
So there were certain non-negotiables that both sides had,
Hmm.
and there was no meeting of minds.
Hmm.
And I think the clear case was everybody wanted to get the deal done.
Hmm.
Right? Those who were involved in the deal wanted to get the deal done
Yeah.
because commercially it looked like a good deal.
Hmm.
I think one of the most interesting, the most difficult deals that we've done, and that's more recently in IFC, has been a co-investment that we did.
Hmm.
It took us, not because it was a very complex deal. It was a complex deal. There were a lot of parties involved. There's a big check involved, but I think the more important piece was it took a long time for us to complete that deal.
Hmm.
And every few weeks or months, either the deal construct or something would evolve, and therefore we would feel, okay, now maybe we can't take this forward, or this deal might sort of fall away. And then everybody would put their heads together, think of a solution, and find a way out.
Hmm.
And therefore every few weeks the deal would come back to life again.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the good part is we ended up doing the deal.
Hmm.
So yeah.
And
So I
any
think
such challenging deal at Bering which took very long?
what I've realized over the last 15, 20 years is that the constraint is more often than not the willingness to do a deal,
Hmm.
or the willingness for parties who are involved to come together to resolve the issue.
Hmm.
Lot of times, sometimes it's larger than that, and there is a genuine issue, and you
Yeah.
have to, and deals break through. But a lot of times it is more to do with whether the people involved are willing to go that extra mile to close the deal, and whether you're willing to sort of sit on the table, discuss, thrash out the issues, find a resolution, and move on.
Hmm.
And typically that will be both at the time of investment in a private equity deal and at the time of exit, right? Where there is a negotiation which is involved. In
Yeah.
the middle, I think when you're invested and you're harvesting the portfolio or you're creating value, there is less of a challenge.
Hmm.
The challenge typically is either at the start of the deal or at the end of the deal because of the season.
Yeah.
But again, it comes down to attitude, it comes down to your ability and willingness, the relationship that you have with the other party. And therefore, at least for me, the most critical piece in this business is relationship,
Yeah.
trust, transparency.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, as an LP, when we are allocating capital, or as a GP, when somebody is putting out capital, you are investing for the long term.
Yeah.
One is investing for the long term. It is a partnership. It is a marriage of sorts. And therefore, if you don't have the trust, the transparency, the relationship, there are bound to be issues.
Yeah. You spoke of very important values of transparency and trust, which I'm sure you had at Bearing. So, just taking a step back as to what made you switch from Bearing to moving, on your journey ahead and joining IFC, what was a triggering point for you?
So, I had a fabulous journey at Bering. I was there for 12 years, right?
Yeah.
Did so many different roles. I think the Bering team was a very close knit, small team. So I'm still great friends with most of them. The biggest trigger point for me was in my own professional journey and personal journey. I wanted to do something different. I had been in a private equity firm and I had literally done every possible function in the PE firm, right? So I knew how it all worked. I was
Yeah.
not specialized in one particular thing. I was a generalist doing literally everything from fundraising. I touched upon fundraising, investing, portfolio value creation, exits, everything. For me, the biggest attraction when the IFC opportunity came about was the fact that I never worked in a large organization, never worked in a large team, never worked in a multicultural international organization. And therefore for me that was the most interesting piece of the work. The second part was of course that I was moving to the other side of the table, and therefore as one person in one organization, you have the world view is frog in the pond. So I knew how a private equity firm works. I didn't have a view on how the private equity industry overall is evolving, what is happening, not
Right.
just in India but in South Asia. I'm a global IC member for IFC. So for me, today I'm able to see how private equity is evolving across emerging markets,
Yeah.
not just in South Asia or India. So these, I think, 2-3 reasons were the most.
And how did this opportunity come up? Did they approach you?
So somebody mentioned to me about this opportunity,
Okay.
and then there's a very standard procedure of how
Right.
you apply to IFC, etc., to the website. So
Ah.
and that's how I sort of applied for the role, and then things worked out.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting point of being the global IC member at IFC. So, what kind of different companies, fund managers do you look at while investing into their funds at different continents? What difference do you observe, and what is one thing in common that you see in all the fund managers?
So I think IFC is a private investor into emerging markets. So our focus is on all emerging markets. The IC that I'm part of is for private equity funds, and the difference is the nascency of the market. Right? Like, for example, even within South Asia, the business that I lead, if you look at India versus you look at the rest of South Asia, the industry, the development of the industry is very different. India 25 years ago was at a very nascent stage.
Yeah.
For private equity, for VC. Today we have a very mature ecosystem. Within South Asia, if you look at the other markets, they're probably at the nascency where the private equity industry is developing. And that is one big difference that you see across markets. Some markets are developed, more developed, less developed. Therefore, the kind of managers you see, the kind of opportunities that they can invest into
Yeah.
are all very different. Some are more tech focused. Some countries, some markets are more traditional. They are more control versus more growth minority investment. So these are sort of very different for each market, and every market is very different. The common thread that I see across markets is the ability of GPs, good managers, to find opportunities and sort of take those companies through the life cycle. And returns may differ, right? Depending on the market, depending on the opportunity, depending on the timing, the vintage. But the ability of good managers to find opportunities, to find the right LPs, get them together, the patience that they show, A lot of times fundraising takes a long time.
Yeah.
So the patience that you have to raise capital and then invest capital and then finally exit is something that you sort of see. That's the common thread across all markets.
Yeah, yeah. And what qualities of fund manager do you look at before putting the weight of IFC behind them as an LP?
Right. So see, I as an LP, let's talk about generally as an LP, right? Rather than IFC specifically, because IFC will have certain other nuances that we look at. But generally, as an LP, what are you looking for? The LP is looking to deploy capital for about 10 to 12 years in a fund manager in the hope. There are two aspects that we're looking for. One is the objective is one to earn returns. Second to develop the ecosystem through this capital. The impact that you create through this capital. So one is the commercial return, second is the impact that you create. And impact could be in different forms depending on the market, depending on the country. In some places the focus is more on ESG, in some places the focus is more on job creation, gender, the quality of job creation, climate, sustainability. So impact could be different so objective is these two, and therefore when you're looking at a manager, you're seeing the manager from these two lenses. Will the manager be able to create commercial returns? Will they be able to create impact for us? Within that, I think there are 4 or 5 different parameters, right? One, whether the strategy makes sense for that market. So that's the first and foremost, because if somebody is trying to do growth minority investing in a market where control investing has always worked, then that's a little bit of a red flag. Maybe the market is changing, but that's what we need to verify.
Yeah.
The second is the team. Has the team been stable? Are there how many senior people are leading the team? Has there been, what is the track record of that team? What is the experience of that team? Have they been doing, let's say hedge fund management, and now they are starting a private equity fund, and therefore do they have experience to do that? The third is honestly, how is the market per se, right? Whether the market is ready for a fund manager like this or an investment strategy like this. And you're looking at basically all of these parameters to arrive at the conclusion whether the fund manager, through all of these things, be able to achieve the
Main
two objectives
objective,
that we talked about, which is either commercial returns or impact.
Right. It's a difficult ask, but you said that IFC is both towards impact and returns, and you said sometimes you have to put one, above the other. You can't say that you are putting it on the same platform. So how is it for IFC? More returns or more impact?
So I think, so IFC is a developmental institution. We're a multilateral organization. And for us, impact is very important, super critical. We are here to create markets. We're here to develop ecosystems, develop the markets. And that's what our role is. Returns are important because at the end of the day, and this is my personal view, at the end of the day, if the money that you invest is not generating returns at all, then if let's say we invest in a company, the company is not making money at all, the company is going to go die, right? Because you can't keep burning cash and expect somebody to fund it. And therefore, there has to be a self-sustaining business model for the company, for the underlying investment to work. But in that business model, there should be an impact.
Yeah.
So it's both. It's both, but
it should be outcome impact driven. Impact driven outcome. That's what it should be.
Outcome is a good way of putting it.
How has your leadership style personally been changed? I'm sure you were handling a team at Baring, and now you're handling the Southeast Asia market for IFC. So how has it changed? What change have you seen in yourself? And what is that one or two things that has remained constant in you as a leader?
So I think the one big change is I've become more patient. Maybe as you grow professionally, personally, as you become older, you become a little bit more patient. So therefore, that's one big change. I think I don't look at myself as a leader for my team. I look at myself as a facilitator.
Hmm.
So when somebody new joins in, I'm only facilitating their learning. We work as a team. We, if we have a deadline, we are all working through the night to sort of meet that deadline. It's not like I've allocated the work and I've gone off to sleep.
Yeah.
So for me, the most critical part is working together as a team. There's full transparency, there's full communication. Of course, sometimes in organizations there are protocols we need to follow, where we need to, keep some things confidential, etc. But apart from that, in general, we're always working together as a team.
Yeah.
Um, I think in private equity, over time, when I've interacted with different people, I've realized there are a lot of alpha people, right, who want to do everything,
Yeah.
go get us, we want to do this, we want to accomplish everything. And the way you do that is not important. Where people will rub people the wrong way, not maintain relationships, not care about how it is done, but just want to get it done. That is something that I dislike and I stay away from.
Yeah.
So I consciously make a choice that my team is always on the same page as me. They know what our objective is, how are we working, we're allocating work, we discuss everything, whether it is right from which fund we should commit to any other activity that we're managing
Yeah.
together as a team. What is the one constant? I think for me, this has always been the one constant, where whoever is working with me, it is not important whether you're coming in at 9 or you're
Yeah.
sitting till 6. Like, I remember I'd heard gory stories with my friends and classmates who used to say, boss, we can't leave before our boss goes, or we have to be in before the boss comes in, or we have to be in office, 9 to 6 or 9 to 8 or 9 to 9. But that I will also sort of give credit to the organization, both IFC as well as my previous organization, where that was not a culture. The culture was, you get your work done, you sort of manage your responsibilities, you get your work done.
Yeah.
It's not important that you're sitting in front of the boss and doing your work.
Right.
And I think that's something that has shaped my working style as well, that we all have to work together. Let's make sure that the work is done.
Yeah.
It's not about who's doing work. I mean, over the last, we were 2 people in the team. So we've literally done everything, right? Work that you do as a entry level analyst versus work that you do as a boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not what work. The important piece is getting your work done, but keeping in mind the humane aspects of
Right.
of it.
But you spoke of, the concept of being the alpha personality, and I've heard this in common from so many of my guests, that there are alpha bosses that really don't have that empathy factor, which is
Correct.
needed to
Correct.
build a team for a longer run. So do you think that characteristic is very evident in male rather than female leaders?
I think there are alpha males and females.
Okay.
Probably because of the percentage of more
Huh.
male seniors or superiors or bosses.
Yeah.
We probably see that more, and therefore it is more commonly known as alpha males rather than alpha
Huh.
females. But there are alpha females as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You will know better.
Yeah, I think I've seen some.
Yeah. That's a conversation for a separate day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but coming to that question of representation of women in private equity, you said that it's not very evident because we see so fewer women managers. So why do you think is that the reason? And did you ever face any challenge while climbing up the ladder, or thought of giving up because you had a family to take care of, or the children, because that's one of the main reasons why women just step aside?
Correct. So I think, see, women in professional roles are very few. Private equity, anyways, grew only in the last 20 years. I remember when I started my career, I was the first investment associate or analyst to join the firm. There were there were 6 or 7 or 8 people. I was the first woman. Most women were either in the support functions or in the admin role or the finance role, etc. Less than, I think, 7%, we will come back with specific numbers. 7% of women in 7% of the private equity VC sort of professionals are women.
Yeah.
And I think the global average is a little bit higher. In India, it's even lower. And I remember reading we are actually worse off than Afghanistan,
Oh my god.
the numbers for gender
Yeah.
representation. So I think generally in women participation in the labor force, etc. Uh, so the reason has been the role, the societal role that women have played as homemakers versus men who've been bread earners, livelihood earners. I think that's changing, right? Over the last 20 years, now when I look around, I see so many more women in every organization.
Yeah.
Not just private equity, but otherwise as well, right? Not just alternatives, PE, VC, but otherwise as well. We see so many more women-founded companies as
Yeah.
well. So I think that's changing for sure. We are doing a little bit when we work with our fund managers, we invest with our fund managers. With every fund manager that we've invested with in the last 4 or 5 years, we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
For in the last 3 years, 100% of the fund managers that we've invested with have committed to doing something on the gender side, where they've said some have agreed to proper key metrics, goals for their fund, for their portfolio companies. Some have, the problem is a lot of times PVC firms or organizations don't even track this data. So a lot of times when we're talking to some of the fund managers, they don't even know how many of their portfolio companies have women employees. How many of them have more than 20%, 30% women, less than 30%. If you don't track, if you don't measure, you can't have a goal.
Right.
So each of our fund manager in the last 3 years, and I'm proud to say this, 100% of them have agreed to set targets, track, measure, and improve from where they are. And everybody's on a different journey. Some people have done a lot of work on this, and they're already miles ahead of the others. But they're saying, okay, we're miles ahead, but we can do more, and this is what we can do. So we recently held a workshop for some of our fund managers on gender diversity, gender lens investing, on how you can incorporate it in your investing process.
Yeah.
When you're evaluating companies, when you're investing in companies, after you've invested, what do you do? And there are some very basic things that you can do with your companies as a fund manager. Most people are aware of it. They're aware of the problem. Most fund managers we talk to want to do something about it. It is the gap is in what should we do about it, rather than we want to do something about it. So it's not the willingness or the intent that is there. It's the knowledge.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that, okay, it's sometimes very simple basic steps like just tracking how many employees are women employees in your portfolio companies can help give you a direction, right?
Yeah.
When you know that, okay, if you're over the last 3 years women employees have been falling, well, there's a problem, so let's do something around it, right? And then at the board level you can have the right discussion with the right people.
Understood. Yeah, I think the change is happening, but it'll take time.
It'll take time, and I think each of us, if we try to do something incrementally,
it'll
over the
result
long
in a
term,
compounded effect.
There'll be a big cascading effect.
Yeah, right. But we entered the last segment of the interview, the rapid fire round.
Okay.
Which, starting off, what does power mean to you? I mean, what did it mean growing up, and what does it mean now?
Power growing up to me meant, it was quite literal. It was power over others, authority to get things done. Today, power means more about the ability to make a change, the ability to create impact, and make sure that my career, my professional life, my personal life, I've impacted enough people around me positively.
And that's also the definition for your success, I'm guessing.
Yes. It's not just about, I think growing up it was more about fame, money, everything else. Today it's less about that and more about wanting to make a difference and wanting to be known as a good person who's done some good work.
Yeah. And as a 25-year-old, when you started your career after your MBA, how are you as a person and how are you now as the leader, at the top of a DFI?
As a 25-year-old, I look back and I realize there were a lot of things I shouldn't have done in life. The risks that I had taken,
Huh.
right? Where you're more foolhardy, I must
Mm.
say, where you don't think about the repercussions. Today, I'm more guarded, more responsible. Uh, Being a parent changes a lot of
Yeah.
that as well, right? Where you're now suddenly responsible not just for
Mm.
yourself but somebody else as well.
Right.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
think more
A
responsible.
lot of women also say that they carry one baggage with themselves wherever they go, which is the mom's guilt, where sometimes they can't manage the kid and the work also when both of them are growing.
Right.
So, have you ever encountered any situation like that? If so, how did you overcome it?
So mom's guilt happens regularly. I've realized now there's no concept of work-life balance,
Yeah.
personal life and work-life balance. There is never going to be a balance. It'll always be one side will always overweight the other one, depending on what day it is. And it is the most important piece is to have a good support system, a good family support system. My husband's super supportive. I know I can rely on him whenever there is a conflict or I'm feeling that guilt. So and not just him but the extended family, the support system that we built around that.
Yeah.
We have enough redundancies to make sure that things don't crumble just because one person is missing.
Yeah.
So I think it's there. It's routinely there. There's
Huh. But the support system makes it feel lighter.
makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
What would have been an alternative career option for you?
I would have loved to be a lawyer.
Oh.
Lawyer. That's
Okay.
one thing. My husband says I argue a lot.
Yeah. That's where it stems from. But and what's your most fond childhood memory?
I think going to restaurants as a family and trying new stuff, trying new food,
Huh.
going out together as a family.
Yeah. Don't get to do that now.
We do that very
Occasionally.
Yeah, occasionally, and then with your parents, with your siblings, it's a different this thing.
Right, right.
Today, when I go out with my daughter, I'm responsible for her.
Huh. Correct.
Earlier, my parents were responsible for me.
Yeah, it's changed now.
Yeah.
And what's the last thing that you did for the first time?
Last thing that I did for the first time, I went for a safari. I'd never been on a animal safari.
Oh, which
My whole
place
life.
was this?
We went to Masai Mara.
I was about to guess that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, you're giving some travel goals to
Yeah.
us now.
No, very nice. If you haven't gone there, you should definitely make
Yeah.
it for sure.
Yeah.
But
sure.
after that, I don't know, I've heard the Indian safaris look very
Oh, yeah,
plain
it
India,
has
right?
to.
Because you don't see so many animals. It's all covered. It's dense forest. So
Yeah.
you
We
get
need
stuck.
to invest in companies that do development for our, for the life of our animals here in
Correct.
India.
Correct.
But yeah, what are some of the red flags that you see as an LP in any fund that you invest or in any company that you co-invest? What are some things that don't sit well with you? In generally, also you can speak, or if you have to speak in your context, that's also fine.
So I think the biggest red flag is lack of consistency or lack of consistent communication or transparency. That's the biggest red flag because I believe, as I said before, you can solve anything when people are willing to do that and when they put their heads together, sitting on a table, sitting at a table. But when there's lack of willingness, and that comes through a lot of times through your communication, consistent communication. That I think is the biggest red flag.
Got it. And lastly, because our show is all about wiping out the norm, I'd like to ask you if there's any incident where you have wiped out the norm or where people say that you have wiped out the norm.
I think for me, being in a small town,
Yeah.
when I was looking to go out of Aurangabad, for my education, for my CA articleship, that I think was a big thing 20 years ago. I came to Bombay for my articleship, and I remember the advice I was getting, my parents was getting, was very, no, you can't send your daughter
Yeah.
out. it's a big world out
Mm.
there with some small town, Bombay. How will
Mm.
she manage? What will
Yeah.
she do? Parents are worried at that age about you in terms of getting into the wrong friendships,
Correct.
doing the wrong things, trying out wrong things.
Mm.
So that I think was a big thing when I came out, when I left Aurangabad.
Mm.
And honestly, after that, Bombay, Pune, then I went to Lucknow, then I was in Gurgaon, Bombay. I've never went back home.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, something that was very different and
Hmm.
from what we have seen, we had seen in Aurangabad.
Yeah. Yeah, the norm says that stay with your parents until you get married. Only go out with your husband, don't go independently.
Correct.
So I think that's a challenge for a lot of women, and I think stories like you, if they come out, a lot of people will get inspired, even the parents, that okay, if her parents could send her out and make her career successful, why can't we do it for our younger girls?
And even making a professional change in the job, changing your job very unexpected is
Hmm.
not very common.
Yeah.
And I think it worked out beautifully
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
So that again was something that I remember when I was speaking to my friends and
Mm.
family as well to discuss this. I was the advice I was getting was, "Are you sure this is the right time? Do you want to wait for a few years and then make the change?" But I think it's worked out very well. So sometimes I think as women we also tend to overthink a lot.
Ah.
I think for me what has worked the most or the best in my life is going with the flow.
Yeah.
I mean, as an MBA, as a CA, I would have been any other typical career path would have been just go to investments, be a specialist. I was a generalist always.
Yeah.
That's what helped me come into this role. We built our business from over the last 3 or 4 years. We've increased the amounts of commitments we're doing, the kind of managers we're backing. So I think all of that comes with also going with the flow rather than overthinking about everything and saying, okay, this is what I want to do, this is the only thing.
Yeah.
So it's good to have goals, but it's good to be flexible as well.
Yeah, correct. The goal shouldn't be crushing you. Yeah,
Correct.
but yeah,
Well
that's
said,
good to know. Very exciting times ahead for IFC. I can feel it.
Thank you so much.
And I'll keep checking on the news to see your latest
Absolutely.
deals
Absolutely.
in the coming times. But lovely time speaking with you. Thanks a lot for your insights and experiences, Neha.
Same here, Radhika. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.